Your world is waiting, but first you have to access it. Welcome to the Joshua Roy Show. We don't do fluff, we do freedom. Real talk on mindset, cutting edge coaching techniques, and the hidden frameworks for lasting change. If you're ready to move from being stuck to becoming the architect of your life, you're ready for this. Hit subscribe. Let's get to work. Welcome now to episode 7 of the podcast. Welcome back. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe. That way you'll get more and more podcasts, more good content coming from me. Now, I've got a real treat for you today. I actually run regular introduction sessions. And so what I've got for you today is one of those introduction sessions where I was talking about the unconscious mind. And it just so happened that the group of people that I was with were asking about the tools. And so I started going more into the tools that we use as coaches. And so if you'd like to learn more about those tools, then you will love this episode. What we're going to realize is this, that all true change takes place in the unconscious mind. Now, I've been running coaching for a number of years. And when I first got started, I had a guy call me up and he said, I want some change work done. And I said, great, let's work out a time. But he said, but I live in Melbourne and you're in Brisbane. So he decided to fly up for a full day. So instead of doing like a normal coaching package, instead of talking to him over the phone over a period of several months, maybe an hour at a time, he decided to come up for an intensive. And so we spent about 6 hours together. And in that 6 hours, I went through a number of the tools that I'd learned through coaching and were able to create some change with him. Now, here's how we knew the change worked. So quite often somebody goes through an experience and you wonder, well, did it work? Am I getting the benefit? What changes happened? I rang him up about a week after we did the work and I said, what have you noticed? What's different? Is there anything that's changed in your life? Just to get that feedback. I like to know that the work that I'm doing is actually taking root. It's actually having an effect. And he said this, he said, you're not going to believe this, but he said the morning after the training, I rolled out of bed and started doing push-ups before my brain even caught up. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd already done 2 or 3 push-ups before I consciously worked out what I was doing. And he said that had never happened before. Now, it just so happened that during our time together, I was able to use some of the techniques to program some change concerning health and exercise into his unconscious mind. And the beautiful thing was that it started showing up without his conscious awareness. Now, that I found that to be quite amazing. Anybody ever heard anything like that before, where you find yourself doing things and the changes happened unconsciously? Dan?
I hear about this in hypnosis, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, so somebody who's got smoking cessation, sometimes they go through hypnosis and it takes away their desire for smoking completely. Like they don't even feel like smoking, even though the triggers and the anchors of smoking may have been very, very powerful. Dan, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I've been studying Jungian shadow work and active imagination and deeply working on trying to access the subconscious mind. I'm struggling with it. I've not made a lot of progress with it yet, but battling addiction, bad behaviors, your compulsive behaviors, lifelong programming, deep set wiring. I'm 46 now, so I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and the older we get, the harder it gets. So the idea with this work is the best time to do it is when you're 16, 15. The harder time to do it is the older you get. And so the longer you put it off, the more difficult it becomes. So 46, they say that the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. That's the best time to do it. But the next best time is right now. So you're doing the work, Dan, which is great. You're putting in the effort and you're doing the work now. And that's what we want. Rob, did you have any ideas about that? Do you believe that all change or true change takes place in the unconscious?
I don't know that much about it.
Right.
I'm just going to pay attention and get a little bit smarter. Thank you.
Nice. But thanks for being here. All right, let's move on. So the question I often ask people is, what will you be remembered for? Now, when it comes to setting up a future and a vision for your life, one way to think about it is to go into the rocking chair, Imagine that you're an old man or an old woman, you're sitting in a rocking chair and you're thinking about your life, and you're also thinking about this, that one day I'm going to die. The reality of mortality says that one day all of us are going to wind up in a pine box, cremated, whatever your end will be. We know that that's going to happen, and what will you be remembered for? So it's good to think about this, because what we can do now is we do what's called reverse engineering, where we see the end and then we work backwards from that point to decide what we want to create. And so it's quite motivating to do that. That if you don't want to be remembered for someone who's a Scrooge, and if you remember the Scrooge story, we're coming up to Christmas, so it's a chance to re-go over that story again. What happened in that Scrooge story was that there was 3 neurological repatterning experts that came and visited Scrooge. He was just very tight with his money. He worked over Christmas, holidays, didn't take time off. To him, the purpose of life was making money and getting wealthy. He didn't care who he screwed over. It was all about himself and making money. These 3 specialists came into his life, and they showed him the past, they showed him the present, and they showed him the future. The past was lost opportunities, and the future was how he'd be remembered, and it wasn't good. Now, the pain of that caused a shift in his nervous system, and it created change. This story indicates to us, and we know it's just a story, it's actually a work of fiction. So it's not actually real. However, the principles taught in the story are real. And what we can do with neurological reprogramming, the mind, nervous system reprogramming and such, is that we can help people actually have a real life example of this situation. I'll explain how it works. The choices that we make, the decisions of our life can change our trajectory. Now, if we look forward and we see a very negative future, just draw a minus there, and we see a very positive future, what we can use is the dual forces of pain and pleasure to send us on a new path, to send us down a new trajectory, so to speak. So on this positive one, maybe you've got money and wealth. Maybe you've got a relationship filled with love and passion. Maybe you've got all the things that you want in life. You've got a career that's phenomenal and you're happy. Whereas in this one, this is the negative. Maybe you've got poor health. Maybe you've gone through divorce or separation. Maybe you've dealt with rejection or had rejection thrust upon you. Maybe you've got a loss of money. You've gone bankrupt. You're in a wheelchair. What we can do in our imagination is we can create a future outcome. Now, the negative future outcome would be associated with pain in your body, pain in your nervous system. Whereas the positive one would be all around pleasure, because that's what we want. Now, who wants this? Well, nobody does. The trouble is, some people's trajectory is heading towards that. Do you know what I'm talking about? Just drop yes in the comments if you know what I'm talking about. You know somebody who's on this ever downward spiral. Maybe they're dealing with depression. Maybe they've got anxiety. Maybe there's always bad things happening to them. And it just continually happens. Why does it happen to some people? And then you've got other people that live this seemingly blessed life where everything that they touch turns to gold and everything's leading in a very positive direction. So this is where we start using the tools and the processes. So one of the processes that I did many years ago, and I remember doing this in a seminar, I went and stood up as the instructor asked us to do. I closed my eyes, and then I was told to create pain in my body. I was told to imagine that I gave up on my dreams, I gave up on my hopes, I gave up on my aspirations, and the results that happened as a result of me giving up. And what happened was I started to create pain in my body. There was tension in my body. And I started creating that tension in my body, in my own nervous system. And I went out 5 years into the future, then 10 years into the future, and then 20 years into the future. And after 20 years, I saw myself, my health was depleted. I was in a wheelchair. I was miserable. I'd lost everything. My marriage had broken up. All of these negative situations had occurred 20 years in the future. And what happened was remarkable because I came back to the present at the encouragement of the instructor. And then he said, now let's reverse that. Let's go out into the future. So get rid of all of that pain and tension in your body. In fact, as we went out 10 and 20 years, he asked us to clench our muscles. He asked us to bend and hunch over. He asked us to grit our teeth and really experience the emotional pain of what it would be like to have this situation occur. Now, this whole process in the negative probably took about half an hour, a long period of time to program or reprogram the nervous system. Then we went out into the positive, 5 years into the future, 5 years of joy and happiness, 5 years of living our best life. And then we went out 10 years, the cumulative effect of joy and happiness and having a strong relationship and having money flow into my life in avalanches of abundance. 10 years of joy, happiness, and then 20 years of peace, love, joy, happiness, and all of these good emotions. And what happened was I was able to experience that in my body. I put a big smile on my face. I was standing up tall and proud. I was imagining looking into the mirror and seeing my ideal self, the ideal weight, looking good, feeling good, all of that. Now, having gone through this experience, and the whole thing might have taken a couple of hours. I don't even know. I don't even remember. Because honestly, I was so into it that time almost stood still. Now, I remember that after this happened, I came back to the present and everything in my life shifted. It just changed. It was an immediate process of change that occurred. And I realized that my nervous system had been reprogrammed at that time. And I thought, this is really interesting. I couldn't explain it back then. I couldn't explain what had happened. I can't explain it now. I understand the science behind it. But back then at that time, I had no idea that new neurological pathways were formed in my brain. I had no idea that I'd gone through a process of, what do we call it, neuroplasticity, where my brain had actually changed shape. And a brain, once stretched to a new dimension, can never return to its original shape. So what happened as a result of that is I became a seminar leader. I became an instructor. I started coaching people. I went down a whole new path. You see, up until then, I was working as a police officer. I was in law enforcement. And this shift had such a radical effect on my life that I started doing a 2-hour morning routine that lasted for 5 consecutive years. And I tell you what, that was a period of absolute change for me. Going from being a police officer, hardened in my job, in my career, gone from being someone who was exposed to trauma. I went to car accidents, I went to suicides, I went to gunfights, I went to all sorts of things. I pulled my gun on a man. I never, thankfully, had to shoot anybody. But there was a man in a domestic violence situation that I aimed my gun. I trained my gun right at his midsection, right at his center mass, ready to pull the trigger. This man had 3 knives on him. He had smashed his vehicle into our police cars, incapacitating them. And I was ready to shoot him. I was ready to end this man's life. And so there was some trauma that had built up inside my body. And I'd become more hardened and cynical. And I would consider, when I'd look at people, I'd consider them not to even be human sometimes. In fact, I had a very negative association with people, especially offenders, and I looked down to them. I thought of them in a very negative light. And not just those people, but that started to spread out to other people. And I started to not care about others. I don't know if you've ever been there in your life where you withdraw your, what would you say, your natural human affection towards other people, and you start looking at everyone like there's something wrong with them, like they're defective or deficient or they're stupid or idiots. This was what was happening. And when I went through this experience, everything changed. Everything changed for me. And I realized that my brain was not set in stone because I discovered a tool that could shift it. And it was a dramatic shift. All right, does that make sense? I want to go ahead and open up this chat now.
The tool that you mentioned, was it this specific tool that you're talking about on the board with the imagining and playing it out? You said the negative, you said over the course of a half an hour, going it by time, 5 years at a time to 20 years. And then the positive, imagining each stage, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, over the course of maybe hours. Is that the tool specifically that you're referring to?
That was one of the tools. This seminar was actually a 4-day seminar, but this was the most impactful tool in that seminar that actually changed my life. Like, it transformed me. And so I realized at that moment how powerful seminars were and how powerful tools like this actually are, because I got a result from it. Like, and it was, my life took on a whole new direction. I became a coach and I started teaching people this and other tools.
I wonder if this is because you said that even the size of the shape of your brain changed.
Yes.
Is this got something to do with the theta waves and so forth?
Yes. So there are different waves in our brain. We know that there's beta, alpha, theta, and delta, that they're different waves. And what happens, I'll explain how that works. So we've got these different wave levels in our brain. And when we go into a meditative state, we go into the alpha state or the theta state or the delta state. Now, what I suggested right at the beginning is that all true change takes place in the unconscious mind. So yes, when we go into those deeper states, then we can create change. That's when the brain changes shape. So yes, it does have a relationship to that. And I did a course when I was a teenager that talked about all these different states of mind. They said that the beta state is like your waking state. That's that where we go through most of the day. The alpha state is that state like when you first wake up, when you're in a groggy sort of state and you're just coming to attention. That's the alpha state. And when we go into meditation and do meditation work, we go into the alpha state. But then the next ones are the theta and the delta state. And it was said that the theta state is like animals, and then the next one below it, the delta state, is more like plants. That's the level that like plants are on. Plants are living things, but they're at a very low level of vibration and like unto the delta state. Now, human beings, when we sleep, we can go into these lower states. During our awake time, we're normally alpha or beta state. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you're talking about in a meditative state, if
Yep.
you're exposed to some of these waves, then that could help you more effectively make these unconscious, subconscious changes.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that,
That's why meditation's so powerful. And that's why there's a lot of courses and out there that teach people how to meditate, close your eyes, and you go into that alpha state. And so as we practice that, as we get better at it, then yes, we can start to create change. The other thing I want to point out, Tez, and this is a good thing you're asking about, is that the first thing is all true change takes place in the unconscious mind. And the second point is that to the unconscious mind, it doesn't matter whether something's in reality or something's a fantasy or in your imagination. To the unconscious mind, it's the same.
yeah.
So this process, when I went out 5 years in the future, I knew that it was just fictitious. I knew that it wasn't real. But my unconscious mind didn't know that. My unconscious mind thought that I'd now lived 5 years into the future and was experiencing those negative emotions. And then my unconscious mind believed that it was actually 10 years in the future and I was experiencing these negative emotions and physiological reactions. And then it went out 20 years and my nervous system actually believed that this was true. So the nervous system responds to not just your reality, but to your thoughts about reality. And that's why we have, the optimist and the pessimist, and they get different results. If you're always looking for what's right, well, you'll find it. the reticular activating system of the brain can help you get it. Whereas if you're always looking for what's wrong and what's missing, then the reticular activating system of your brain finds that. And so you can directionalize the focus of your mind. Now, experiencing these negative emotions and then going back and experiencing these positive emotions, what happened was my nervous system now had two possible outcomes, 1 and 2, the positive and the negative. And then the shift happened at an unconscious level where I woke up the next day and all I wanted, all the motivation in my body, all the energy of my soul wanted this. And it just created an upward trajectory. And it was rapid and it was powerful. And that's how I know it works.
So in your meditative repatterning, reprogramming tool process, you have to go on the path of the negative during the meditation and then go on the positive track as a second stage of your meditation. Do you also have the, the alpha, beta, theta, whatever waves playing in the background while you're meditating?
Well, yes, you've got those waves are always there. But what we're doing is we're really accessing here more the alpha state. So this is more, it's an alpha state process because you're wanting to create a shift or a change at the level of the nervous system. And if we stay in the beta state, well, that's not going to serve us. Going into the alpha state and even, if possible, going below that is better for transformation and faster for transformation. So if we did this logically, so we could do this in the beta state, for example. And in the beta state, what we do is we'd write down, okay, what's going to happen if we don't start a business or if we quit our job and if we stop telling our partner that we love them and we do that, what's going to happen? And you could write out logically a big list in each of these. In fact, you could get ChatGPT to help you. What would happen if I did this? And then you could use that as a starting point. You could write it down on a piece of paper or type it. So you could come up with a list of all of these negatives and all of these positives. Now you're working there with you could say the beta part of those brainwaves. But then if you want to go deeper into the alpha state, now we start looking at, well, what does that feel like? What is the experience of that? And then you've got to feel that in your body. You've got to feel it. And as you go through deeper levels, change becomes more rapid. You see, at the beta level, change is very slow. And that's why we use the meditative process. We've got to get down into the lower levels so that we can reprogram the nervous system. So really good question, but that's what we're looking at doing, reprogram the nervous system. Now, when you said you have to go into the negative, no, there are other tools that just look at the positive. There are other tools that just show one way, and that can be very beneficial, just showing the positive. And I would also recommend not to overuse this tool. And also I would recommend not using this tool in someone who's stuck in negativity. Do not use this tool. It's not a good tool. Someone who already lives this life, don't use this tool. It's not going to shift them. What you want to do is create that contrast. And really what you've got here, this gap here, that's the contrast. And what you're wanting to do is get the nervous system to see and experience that contrast. So if a person already lives here, you only need the contrast. You only need to create this side of it because they've already got that. And not all processes need the negative, that they just don't. This is one process where the negative actually does, well, I call it slingshot. It can kind of slingshot you into positivity.
Thank you.
No worries. You're welcome. No, great questions. Excellent. Very, very good. Dan, did you have any comments?
No, I'm excited to hear the other tools.
Nice, nice. Would you like me to go through some of them and let you know what other tools are in coaching?
Sure.
Would everyone else be interested in that? Because I can go through and tell you some of the tools. So I'll tell you about the next tool, and this is one that I really love. It's called the gift. And the gift is a tool of reprogramming someone's past. And I'll tell you the benefit of this tool. The benefit of this tool is that we get to change in a state of joy. not in a state of pain. So this tool, we emphasize pain, then we emphasize pleasure, then we build the contrast, then the nervous system makes the change. The next tool is a really good one. And I'll just tell you a quick story. There's a woman, her name was Dee, her name is Dee, and Dee was suffering with nightmares. She had nightmares a couple of times every week. She would wake up in a cold sweat and just from a nightmare. Now, I did the gift process with Dee and the nightmares stopped. And it was just an incredible result for her. So here's what the process is. In this next process, or this next tool called the gift, what I do, and once again, this is using meditation, is I go back into the past. And I have a person go all the way back to the past where they experienced a childhood joyful experience. And this is really important that we get joy. So we go to a childhood experience, and if somebody can't remember one, I simply say, well, have a think about a time where, you know, it was a birthday or a party or a good friend, or you're doing an activity that you love, or maybe you got a pet for the first, whatever situation. Once a person's got a hold of the memory, what we do is I get them to close their eyes and we go back into the past. So we travel back to the past and we revisit that younger version of themselves. And when we revisit them, I ask them this question. I said, now look at that child and notice how much fun they're having. Notice the animation, movement of the body, gesture, posture, facial expressions. Notice that child and the joy that they're experiencing. That child is you. Now, quite often people will remember and know that when a child is excited and happy, a child doesn't walk, they bounce, they jump, they leap. Their expression is carried all over their face and all throughout their body. So what they do is they go revisit, they see that. Then I say, now it's time to take that child, reverse the movie, take the child by the hand and lead them a short distance away and tell them who you are. And then I ask you to give them the gift, and I get them to whisper into the child's ears. They then hug the child. They then experience a merging with the child. And then I start moving them through their life, and we go to all of the experience of life. Now, what this process does is it takes this feeling of joy through to their teenage years, from childhood to teenage years, through to their adult years, and all the way to now. And so this feeling of joy, it's almost like we're getting the emotion joy and we're completely saturating their whole timeline. This is part of timeline therapy, with this feeling of joy. Then what we do is we move out into the future. And as we move out into the future, we see a light. I ask them to dive into the light. Then I let them know the thin shell of their body is expanding in the light. Once that all happens, then I get them to focus on gratitude and allow their whole history to be filled with light and love and life. And once that's done, I then count them back, and that's the end of that process. Now, what that process does is it's an emotional clearing process. And when I first went through this process, it was so good. Like, I noticed that I had more confidence. I had more self-assurance. I had better self-awareness. I understood myself better. And also the benefits of this is when you start doing these techniques, you start being able to get a better handle on addiction, bad behaviors. You start realizing what the cause of these problems might have been. You get more awareness around it, and it's really beneficial. So that's a process called the gift. Any questions about that process?
Yeah, this is a guided meditation then, something
Correct.
that you do over the course of what, like an hour or half hour?
Yes, I probably spent about 20 minutes on this one. So it's a fairly quick technique. Yep.
And is it something you could do by yourself, or is it better to have somebody talking you through each phase of it?
So the problem with talking yourself through a meditation is that you've got to take on two roles. You've got to be an instructor and a client, or you've got to be the director and also the actor. It's like, and it can be done. So there's some directors out there who direct movies and act in the movie. You know what I'm talking about? Mel Gibson and a few others have actually directed a movie that they've actually acted in. So they direct and act together. Now they're taking on a double role there. Now you can do that eventually, but if you were acting for the first time and directing for the first time, there's no way that you've got the capacity to be able to do that because you're spreading yourself too thin. You're taking on two major roles at the same time. One is the director and one is the actor. So what you want to do is be the actor in it, and that's why it's always better to have somebody guide you through it. So yes, a guided process would be best. Now, what makes this technique even more powerful is I ask a number of questions of people and they give me answers, and I use their answers to reinforce the empowerment principles during this meditation. So if somebody says, I want to make a lot more money in my business, I want to have a relationship that's filled with love and passion, I want to stop ruminating. What I'll do is during the process, I will set up cues to remove rumination and to help that person get their desired result. And when I count them back from 1 to 5, I'll start to install that into the unconscious mind using hypnotic language. And so there's a lot of techniques that I'm using all around it to actually get the change. And then that's why when people get to the end of the process, something's different in their life. They no longer have the sadness, or they no longer have the fear. Something shifted and they notice this. And what I often ask at the end is I say, now go back and think about a negative experience that you had when you were a child and try to feel bad about it and notice what happens instead. And when I say that to most people, they say, I can't. It's like there's something shifted, something's changed, and it has. Now, whether it's actually shifted or changed, or whether you believe it is, it's the same thing, because your beliefs determine your actions, and your beliefs that determine your action determine your results. And so whether you really had a change happen or whether you believe that a change happened, you start getting different results in your life. And that's the power of coaching. A lot of it comes back to your mindset and your belief system. And processes like this, whether they actually create new pathways in your brain or whether you just think they do, you actually get similar results. That's the power of your brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I noticed you picked Mel Gibson as your example of a director actor because you're Australian.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's many out there, but yeah, Gibson's the one.
It makes sense. It makes sense for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So is there any other questions about that? That's another process called the gift. I'd love to talk about a few more processes, whichever way you want to go. If you want to learn more processes or me talk about some more, I could do that. If you'd like to learn something else, ask a question. There's many ways that I can take this discussion today, or I can come back to this where we look at a control room, a control panel. And I want to tell you a quick story that relates directly to that. There was an energy company that had a problem. There was a loss of energy. They didn't know where the loss of energy was coming from. And so what happened was they called up an expert. The expert came along. He was wearing a white suit. He had a hard hat on and he walked around with a notebook. And he just started making notes, a clipboard, started making notes everywhere. Now, at the end of 2 days, he came to the control room, called in the management team, and he walked over to a dial in the control room. He walked over and he drew an X through the dial. And he said, there's your problem. He said, find out what machine is hooked up to this dial. Replace it and the problem will be solved. So sure enough, they got together, they worked out which machine it was. They then got rid of that machine, got in a new machine to replace it. And sure enough, productivity went back up to 100%. They were no longer losing energy. Now, it just so happened that after another few days, the manager actually got an invoice as an email as to services rendered, for the completion of this work and this information. And he looked at it and the price was $25,000 and he nearly fell over. He said this person just came in, he walked around for 2 days, He took some notes on a clipboard. He drew one X on a dial, and he's charging $25,000. So he sent the message back and he said, could you please itemize the invoice? And so he looked at it the next day, and sure enough, there was an itemized invoice. And the itemized invoice had 2 points on it. The first point was drawing X on dial. This is part of the invoice, $1. But the second part was very interesting, knowing where to draw the X, $24,999. You see, he was paid for his experience and knowing where the problem was. Now, when it comes to you and your life, you may have energy leaks. Oftentimes, you don't know where those leaks are coming from. Maybe you're ruminating on the past, negative things in your life. Maybe you're catastrophizing. You're thinking about the future. Maybe there's an associated depression or anxiety. There's a challenge in your life. Maybe you're not good with relationships. You don't know why you push people away. Whatever the case may be, we're all dealing with something. We've got something. We've got trauma from our past, our youth. We've got challenges as a teenager. We've got things that were said to us by peers and other people. Now, these all have an effect on us. And one thing that I do is I help people uncover and become aware of what the problems are. Now, once we've got the awareness, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. Once we've got that awareness, then we can start attacking the real issue. And what you'll find is when we start plugging up the problems or the energy leaks in a person's life, productivity can actually go to another level. And that's amazing. All right, so there was a couple of things I touched upon there, and I want to talk about one of them. And this one's called the womb of eternity. It's also known as the voice of authority. So here's another process. So what I do is I get people to go all the way back to the past, the time of your birth, when you became incarnate, when you became a living soul, when you went through the birth canal. And I go back further than that. We go back all the way back into the past, into, you could call it a pre-existence or a life before birth. And we go to a place called the womb of eternity. And the womb of eternity is out in space. And oftentimes when I'm doing this process, I'll play some sort of space music, really nice, flowing, gentle music, just to get a person to experience and feel what it might be like. And I get them to imagine space. However, it's different than, the same as you would imagine space, but different in that it's not cold. It's the perfect temperature and all of your needs are instantaneously met. You have want or need for nothing. You're just completely safe in this place called the womb of eternity. So what we do from that place is I take them to a subject of voices. Because what people don't realize is that the voices inside your head, inside your mind, that sometimes say positive things and sometimes are quite negative, have been developed throughout your life. They're the results of what other people have said to you, about you, ideas that you've picked up from conversation. Also, there's ideas in your mind about different failures you've had throughout your life. And so now what we've got is all these voices in our head. Now, some of these voices are our own, but quite often they're other people's voices. And what I get people to do is focus on what I call the voice of authority. One voice that you can always trust. One voice that will always treat you right. And then what I do is I get people to come with that voice in mind back to the birthing experience, and we start systematically moving through the first 7 years of life. Why the first 7 years? Well, that's the imprint period, the imprint period of your youth. Psychologists teach us that the first 7 years in our development are fundamental. They're so important for our development. And what we do is we look at all of the voices of parents, voices of peers, siblings, voices of other people, voices of teachers. And as we go through those first 7 years of life, we pick up one voice, the voice of authority, and we turn it up. And then we take every other voice and we turn it down. Now, we go through all 7 years, and this process can take around about around about 20 to 30 minutes to do this process. And then when we get to the end of it, what tends to happen is people have trouble listening to those negative voices. It's almost like those voices have disappeared. It's almost like those voices have become nothing more than white noise in the background. And what this does for a person, it helps them to use their energy towards their goals, towards their vision, towards what they want to create. And so it's a very powerful tool. So that's called the womb of eternity or the voice of authority. I use those terms interchangeably, but that's another process. Is that interesting? Any questions about that process?
How can we actually turn down those voices that we don't want to follow?
Yeah, so the way we do it is we use our imagination. We use the faculty of our imagination. Remember what I said before, that the unconscious mind doesn't know the difference between reality and fantasy. So it doesn't know whether it's real or not real. And I'll give you an example of this, Rob. Just go ahead and hold your hand up like this and imagine now that there's half a lemon in your hand, half a lemon. Okay, now do you know the taste of a lemon? You ever bit into a lemon before?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, so what I want you to do is grab that lemon and I want you to put it up to your mouth and imagine biting into it. Just go grab it and bite into it and just wait and be patient and notice what happens in your mouth and just give it a moment. And so now what you probably are going to experience is you'll start to salivate a little bit more. You'll start to feel a bit of moisture or even a bit of dryness in your mouth with the anticipation of eating a lemon or chewing it. Can you feel that in your mouth?
Nothing significant.
Okay.
The corollary to this is when I've heard these other voices,
Yep.
and when I was studying philosophy,
Right.
there's a lot of cultures and philosophers
Yep.
who have said there's always the good and the bad.
Yep.
And I think that's come through for about 5,000 years. And for some reason, I in my mind, this is good and bad from 5,000 years ago. No?
So look, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So you're saying that there's good and bad, and that's what you've thought about for the last five. So from what we learned from history over the last 5,000 years, there's good and there's bad.
There's always been those characters, and they've had different names. And for some reason, when I hear these other things, I'm saying that's a 5,000-year-old philosophy of simple good and bad. No.
Got it. So are you saying that because there's good and bad and because it's everywhere, that there's no capacity or no way to turn down those negative voices? Is that what you?
I painted two voices,
Gotcha.
good and bad. That's the only voices I heard.
Right.
And I thought the Romans had foxes and good guys, and I thought the Assyrians had certain characters they talk like that. But I always painted them as good and bad, which Plato and Aristotle told us about.
Yes.
Saying no.
So no, here's what I'm saying. Here's what I am saying, and I do understand what I'm starting to get a picture now of what you're saying. You're saying that there's good voices, there's bad voices. We have these voices in our mind. What I'm suggesting with this technique or tool is that if those negative voices are disrupting your peace and your happiness, and they're causing you to feel negatively about yourself, if they're causing you to, fall into depression, or they're causing you to be overly anxious about the future, or they're causing you to be stuck in fear, what I'm suggesting is that this tool, this technique, we can turn down those negative voices using a tool like this, and it can actually help a person function better. Now, if that's not a problem for you, if there's negative voices or good voices, but it doesn't affect your life in any adverse way, then that's not an issue. So we don't need to specifically focus on this tool in your case. But for someone who's suffering with depression, anxiety, for someone who can't get out of their house because there's so much fear and because of these voices in their head, whatever the case would be, and I'm not talking about voices in your head as a mental health condition, because that's schizophrenia. Right, so I'm not talking about that per se, but what I am saying is that we all have these voices and we all hear them in our mind, in our mind's eye. So what I'm saying is if they affect your happiness, if they're affecting your health and well-being, then you might want to consider a technique or a tool to see if we can't elevate the positive voices and eliminate or reduce the negative voices. Rob, does that make more sense?
A little bit. I've read Silva
Yeah.
about a dozen times in the past 10 years.
Right.
And I think the latest interpretation I heard from him was that we have one voice who is our learned beliefs, and we have a new belief.
Right.
And I think Silva says those two voices are what we know and what we're going to accept. I think those are the two voices that, now maybe I'm getting off tangent with Silva.
Yeah, so look, it's just like I said, this is just a technique that helps a person to reduce the effect, the negative effect of negative voices in your life. So if both of those voices, the one that, like you just described there, if they're both useful, well, it could really be the same voice, but if it's useful, then consider that to be a voice of authority and consider any voice that isn't useful to be something else. And so what will tend to happen with this is this can decrease a person's rumination. It can decrease a person's negative feelings towards themselves. It can decrease, and with those things in mind, it's a very positive process. The whole point of this process is just around, okay, negative voices aren't necessarily serving you unless they're, there for your survival. If it's a voice in your head that says, don't walk in front of that car because you become, you become food for the buzzards. If it's that type of thing, then definitely that's a good voice because it's protecting you. But the trouble is people have these voices that says, don't say something because others will laugh. And then and then a person gets triggered and then they go into this deep depressive state. So you get the idea, everyone's at a different level. And some people, these voices in their head that they made up or that things were said to them when they were young and they kept thinking about them and ruminating on them, that they've created problems. And what I'm doing with this technique and others is helping to alleviate those problems so that people experience those problems less. And that's what it's just a technique. It's not the only way to do it. There's, the Silva technique. There's other modalities of doing things. This is just one. This is just another one you could throw into the mix. Yeah.
If I may.
Sure.
I think what Joshua is talking about is behavioral change for people who are suffering from negativity and self-doubt, self-criticism, and that sort of stuff. Whereas Rob, I think you are talking more about philosophy, which is, on a whole other plane. It's completely two different things.
Dan, did you have any thoughts?
Are these these techniques that you're going over here? Are they would you consider them visualization techniques, meditation techniques, or hypnotherapy techniques?
Well, I think it's a combination of all three. I consider that when somebody meditates and goes through a process, that we call that self-hypnosis. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a person into trance, and when you're in the trance-like state, the brain goes to that, the alpha state. We were talking about that earlier, and that's where change can happen. And change happens more rapidly in the alpha state than it would in the awake state.
So it's like a hybrid, like a synthesized blend.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you could call it hypnotherapy. It really is because it's a trance. I'm attempting to put a person into somewhat of a trance, but I allow the person to go into that trance by themselves. I'm not actually putting them under with actual hypnosis techniques. And with hypnosis, what they do is they take people in their equilibrium, like they pull the hand, and suddenly the equilibrium imbalance causes a person to go into a deep sleep. Now, hypnosis works on many people, and you've probably seen some stage hypnotists that get up there and they do the hypnosis on the stage. And look, a lot of the times what they do is they'll choose very suggestible people who will actually just go along with the hypnosis. And so how much of hypnosis actually is working, and how much of it have they just found a very, very, very agreeable person that it actually looks like it is. I'm not saying that it's not real, because it certainly is, but I'm just saying that, you know, there's an interesting way that they actually choose people. And you'll notice that when they pick people to go on stage, the group will get smaller and smaller, because the people who are less suggestible will be actually brought down. And by the end of it, they'll leave 2 or 3 people up on stage that are actually very highly suggestible. And those are the people that are best for the demonstration of hypnosis and the power of it. Like I said, and it doesn't work. And then there are other people who cannot be hypnotized. It doesn't matter how skillful the hypnotist is. There are some people who have that level of resistance. They just don't believe it. And therefore, it's not possible. So what I do is I just ask the person, are you willing to go into somewhat of a self-hypnosis or trance? And I just say, close your eyes. I'm going to do a closed eye process, and I just lead them through it. And I use hypnotic language to get them into that trance during the process. Welcome back. How good was that? Learning all about trance and hypnosis. And there's 3 tools we went over. So I hope you got a lot out of that episode, because I'm giving away a lot of my secrets in these podcasts. And these are all processes that I use regularly. And I tell you what, the amount of change that I've seen and the newness of life that is brought about through these processes and techniques are absolutely mind-blowing. And I've had experience after experience where people have come through these processes and the negative self-talk's gone. They're feeling more confident. They're feeling happier. After the emotional clearing, changes happen in their life. They're able to attract the right person into their life and into their world. It works with relationships. It works with a person's health and health problems. It can work in all areas of life. So these are really powerful tools. Your commitment to yourself should be to discover who you really are. Unlock your incredible self and unleash that on the world. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for spending some time with me, and I look forward to seeing you at the next episode.